Hi everyone, this is Corey from Support Within Reach. We are Beltrami County's Sexual Violence Resource Center. We also have offices in Park Rapids, Walker, Bagley, Grand Rapids, and Aiken. I'm based out of the Bemidji office, so that's where I'm coming from you today. This presentation is a Sexual Violence 101, and what I've done is really tied my story into this presentation. So you know that I am a survivor of sexual violence, and that really my story kind of plays into a lot of the statistics surrounding sexual violence. So you'll kind of see how this all goes together once we get started. So to start off, to understand how this is going to work, I really need to tell you about me and who I am. So I was raised here in northern Minnesota, born, raised here, moved to North Dakota for a very short period of time and came back. I was raised in a household with both siblings and both parents. I am a high school graduate. I went on to get my correctional officer certificate. I have 2 kids. I am married. I have an associate's degree in criminal justice. And I also have my bachelor's in criminal justice with an emphasis in human services. All that leading to becoming an advocate here at Support Within Reach, which is ultimately my dream job. Because like I've said before, I am a survivor of sexual violence. So all this stuff is very passionate and near and dear to my heart. So that is why I chose to do this work. All right. So, where does my story begin? Well, my story really began in second grade. I had met my best friend. We were inseparable. We did everything together. I mean, we could, it's that best friend vibe where you can finish each other's sentences. In fourth grade, I had went to go stay at her house. That night, I was raped by her older brother. He was 22 and I was 11. He told me to keep quiet, don't make a sound, so that's exactly what I did. I stayed quiet, didn't make a sound. There were some people that were woke up in this midst of it happening. And therefore, there were definite signs, but again, everybody was very much intimidated by this person, so they were all keeping quiet and they didn't tell anyone either. So I want to take a pause here, and you're probably thinking, what does all that have to do with this, right? What does that all have to do with sexual violence? Well, every 73 seconds, someone is sexually assaulted in the United States. So if you're thinking about the time we're going to spend on this presentation, think about that every 73 seconds, someone is being sexually assaulted while we're doing this presentation. 90% of victims know their offenders. I knew my friend's brother. I knew of him. I had met him before. I had been around him before. I knew my offender. Majority are family, friends, or acquaintances. Again, it's my best friend's brother. 9 in 10 females are sexually assaulted by the age of 12. You look back to my story, boom, right there it is again, by the age of 12, which mine was 11. So when we're asking people to think about these statistics just that we're looking at right here, we're thinking, this could be your sister, your cousin, your auntie, your friend, your mother, your brother, your dad, your uncle. Sexual violence does not just go female or male. It encompasses all of our gender identities, all of our sexual orientations. Anyone and anyone in this world can be sexually assaulted. It does not discriminate against even age. It doesn't discriminate against age. So when we're talking about this, we're really talking about that deep down, thinking that any person you're coming in contact with could be a victim or survivor of sexual violence. Now, obviously, we don't want you to live in a world where you're going to think, is it this person, or is it that person, or is it that person, or is it that person? Just to kind of keep that in your awareness, saying, hey, like, this could happen, this does happen. and just kind of keeping it on the forefront of your mind. So, continuing to my story. That specific night when I was 11, I didn't talk openly again until I was 18 years old. I had heard rumors in between this 11 and 18, 11 and 13, that he was in prison for unrelated crimes, so I never really saw him. Even though I was at her house constantly, I never saw him. And it was always just that rumor that he was in prison. When I was 13, this is a new house, new place, that I had went over to her house. I mean, multiple times in between here, I've been over there. It was my best friend, right? Well, he was there. And by this point, he had groomed his sister, and I'll get to the term groomed here in just a minute, but he had groomed his sister to bring him girls. Being that there was already a relationship between her brother and I, and when I say relationship, I don't mean we were dating, we were anything like that. It's that we had already had that history, so we already had that relationship. So I was really an easy target for him. So that's kind of where the story really continues and starts to build upon. All right, so here in this slide, you see what I'm talking about when I'm talking about grooming behaviors. These grooming behaviors they're teaching a person the way to act or give in to obedience by a dominating figure. Most often these dominating figures are adults, but these can also be teenagers. Maybe they're a little more assertive or aggressive, and then the other person is just that kind of that passive person. So that's where that person, again, doesn't have to be an adult, but it's most often an adult. So what are some signs of this grooming? Special attention or gifts, isolating the child from others, filling needs within the family, treating the child as if he or she is older, and gradually crossing physical boundaries even in public. So when we talk about my story, we talk about I received special attentions and gifts, isolating me from others. If there were others around, I always had to be by him. He would treat me as if I was older, and crossing boundaries, not so much in public, but if we were in private or with a group of people, he would cross those boundaries. But just thinking like any of these can apply to anyone. They might have one sign, they might have two signs. Just because they might have that one sign doesn't mean that they're being groomed. Yeah, I mean, things happen like isolating a child from others. There might be something else at play there, right? But if we're looking at multiples of these, you're most likely looking at grooming behaviors, but that just requires you to pay more attention to kind of pay attention to what's going on and kind of get your nose maybe in there just a little bit more than you normally would to say, hey, what's really going on here? And kind of just trying to work those steps to really figure out, is this child, is this youth, is this adult even being groomed for possible sexual abuse? So when I seen him at the new house, I kind of had that gut feeling that I knew it wasn't going to be good. He continued to rape me from that day over the next year, multiple times, mostly on weekends. Not that that even matters right now, but just to kind of give you the perspective of how much it had happened. So you might be asking, like, where were my parents? Well, they were present, but they weren't very present in my life. They wouldn't call themselves alcoholics, but society would. So they definitely had other things going on in their life where maybe we weren't the primary focus, but they were still there. They were still good parents in the end. It's just, I like to think as teens will be teens. We're sneaky, we hide things. And that's really, I put it to that, this still would have happened. They would have never known from just being a young youth. When it came to my offender, I had to give in to him or it would be forced. So there was never really an option to not have it happen to me. He would, most likely talk me into it, but then if I would be like, no, I don't want to, or I don't want to do it again, it would definitely then be forced. So just looking at, I really survived and I did what I had to do to get through those moments. All right. So why did I act the way I did? Why do victims and survivors act the way they do? Well, when our brain is enduring any form of trauma, I mean, even if you think about a car accident, um, witnessing someone get hurt, especially when we're talking about murder or um, even watching an accident can be traumatizing, right? So our brain has these common responses, which we call fight, flee, or freeze. And kind of the other one, which I'll talk about here in a second, is surviving. Um, so when a victim goes on autopilot just to get through the trauma, like I said, I just went, boop, yep, get it done, get it over with. That's exactly what I was doing. I was surviving. I also like to define the words force and coercion because people define them very differently. We go with the basic definitions. So force is using threats, intimidation, or physically taking what is theirs, not theirs to give. Coercion is making a person feel guilty, talking them into it, using persuasion into the act, or by threats or force. Could have there been help? Um, so it wasn't until I went home with some bruising that was visible to the naked eye that people began really questioning what was happening to me. The school really began the questioning, but of course, I denied everything. But I say, you know what, that's the Philippines. They're going to deny. If they're doing something they weren't supposed to be doing, or if, like they are experiencing sexual violence, they may not admit it right away. Are we going to get in trouble? Are we going to, what's going to happen next? We don't know what's going to happen next, so we're going to really guard ourselves. But it wasn't until a spur of the moment, I told a trusted teacher, right? They always tell you to tell a trusted teacher. But little did I know that, teachers are mandated reporters. And that didn't fare too well in my books at that time. She called my mom, and after I begged her not to, and then she also called the police after we left the school. She was doing her job, and I get that. So I'm going to talk about mandated reporting here next. It just kind of gives you like how fast things happened and kind of the process of how they happened. So when we're talking about mandated reporting, we're really talking about, you know, teachers have this standard, and it's by law, just like we do here at Support Within Reach. But I'm not saying, don't trust that teacher. If you really trust that teacher that much, go ahead and spill the beans. Um, But what we say to youth when we're talking to them, we say, you know what? We're not mandated reporters for everything like teachers are. Like, they have to report suicide, they have to report all these other things, right? We report child sexual abuse, and we report youth trafficking, those kind of things, and child abuse. So if you're not falling into those three realms, so if we're saying it's like peer on peer, that's not a mandated report to us, but it's going to be a mandated report to the teachers. So that's kind of where we can kind of flip things. So what we always tell teachers and what we tell professionals is, if someone's coming to you and they're starting to like dig real deep into this conversation, it's okay to say, hey, you know what, let me get someone here that can help you with this more specifically, okay? And by calling us in, you know, you might be saving yourself from a mandated report, making them, because we all know they're not fun to do. So you might be saving yourself from a mandated report, but you also might be saving this youth that had entrusted you. And if now they're like, you're like, I have to report this, you might lose that trust. Will they show up to your class tomorrow? You know, so it's really about, or will they show up to your appointment tomorrow if you're a professional in the community? So it's really about kind of learning what resources have to report what, and also what mandated reporting includes for your organization. I do have the graphic here, which kind of talks about like identifying the signs of abuse. And they're just kind of general things. Again, this presentation is normally used for schools as a sexual violence 101, but I thought it'd be really good for professionals also to kind of just see what kind of those basics that we're looking at when we're talking about how we're seeing the signs of abuse, how we're seeing the signs of sexual abuse. But then we also talk about like those symptoms and signs you can't see. Is your client, is your student, is your whoever that you're working with coming with constant stomach aches, constant headaches? Or they're just kind of, you know, like sluggish and not walking around? You know, that's the difference from being really tired. If they're tired, you can kind of get a conversation out of them, but if they're just moving slowly and they're kind of just, they shut themselves off from the world, that could be another sign that something is going on with them. So what happened next in my story? Well, after I told the teacher, a lot of doctor's appointments, police investigators, therapists, a lot of things came into my life. I wasn't expecting any of this. For just imagining a 14-year-old going through a police interview, not an easy thing. It's really difficult. But little did I know, being that young, how impactful these people become in my life, because at that point, I literally hated everyone. You know, I'm just trying to help you, I'm just trying to help you, I'm just trying to help you. Like, that's the last thing I wanted to hear at that age. Just because I'm like, leave me alone, I want my own space. But they didn't want me to have my space because they were concerned about me. So that's really, you know, I look back now, and those people that helped me, I actually have connections with today. So it really can turn out really good. But again, just thinking, if we're thinking at a teen's mindset, that they're not going to be there. They're not going to be, yes, I want help. Yes, I need all these things. Yes, 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 yes. You're not going to get that. If you do, it's a very rare occasion, and the angels came down, you know, so just thinking about it like that. Over the next year, court happenings were proceeding, for which the most part my parents attempted to hide from me. Again, being a sneaky teenager, I was able to find those answers, and find the stuff they were hiding. But But, you know, in the end, again, you know, looking back now, I get it. I really do. So I've been talking a lot about, obviously, my own story, because it's the name of the title of this presentation. But what I really wanted to do was this very first graphic with all the little circles on it, is talk about all these different areas of sexual violence that I haven't touched yet. So, you know, we're talking about sexual exploitation, trafficking, cyber harassment, degrading sexual imagery, indecent exposure, stalking, sexual harassment, and then sexual assault and rape. All of these things encompass sexual violence. So it's not just rape or sexual assault. It's all of these things. So it can be a big circle. Somebody could experience 3 of these things at once. You know, and what kind of big circle does that build when we're talking about those things? You know, so, and we even include in this to a great extent homophobic and transphobic jokes and sexting. This is an older image. I think it needs to be updated to include these things, because it is really about, we say sexual violence is a gender-based violence, and homophobic and transphobic go into that. So we like to include that also. So when we talk about consent, you must always get consent. It's a willing, freely given yes to when people are able to make that decision. If they change their mind halfway through, respect that. You know, they have that right to say, nope, I don't want it anymore. I'm done, over it. And I would say yes means yes, no means no, and stop means stop. If you're not getting a clear yes, don't do it. If they're saying no, that doesn't mean try something else. And if they're saying stop, by golly, that means stop. You stop at a red light, you stop at a stop sign. It's not telling you to go, is it? There you go. This next one might be a little bit hard for you to see, but it really talks about kind of a barrier to victims and survivors of reporting who decide to report to law enforcement, or they're like, do I report? What is this going to look like? You can see it starts with the arrest, goes to the booking, first appearance, works its way around and down, right? So that really can be stressful because the arrest might not happen right away. The first appearance was within 72 hours of arrest. So if they're arrested a week from the moment, or a week from the incident, you know, you got all that time in there where the investigation's going on, they don't know what's really happening. So it's really a long process, and it can be difficult. And then if we're talking about, you know, these families or these victims and survivors that are going to have to be called to testify, they have all this time to think about it. They have all this time that their life is put on hold. So it's really interesting, and it really puts into perspective maybe why some people decide not to report to law enforcement. And this process is scary and it's difficult, but it is something Support Within Reach can help through, guide victims and survivors and families through. So, as my story continues, my parents attempted to give me counseling, but I refused. I wasn't ready. We always tell parents reach out to us all the time and say, this happened to my child, I need to get them help, blah, blah, blah. And we're like, does your child want to speak to us? Does your teen want to speak to us? If we're talking about adults, does your friend want to talk to us? Does your daughter want to, even with adults, if they're not ready, they're not going to commit to this healing journey. This healing journey isn't easy. So if they're not ready, don't force them. I got really depressed. I started using drugs, and I was drinking a lot more than I already was before the assault happened, or during the assaults, when the assaults were happening. I had to leave my high school because of constant harassment from individuals that knew my offender. I got kicked out of another school. I spent the next 2.5 years in an alternative school. Best years of my life, to be honest. My offender ran multiple times before being sentenced to 60 days in jail. That's rough, right? Like, we're thinking, he did all this to you and he got 60 days in jail. It's pretty common, especially if they sit a long time before they are sentenced. It's pretty common. That too, and what they are being charged with, was there a plea agreement, and all these things come into play. He and his girlfriend would drive by my house. They would follow me in public, and they made attempts to talk to me when nobody was around me. So it's not like he was sentenced, it was done and over with. It continued. This is actually fairly common when we're working with clients and we're hearing their stories that, yep, it happened maybe 5 years ago, but the harassment still continues. The constant checking up on continues. Maybe if they did a jail time, they're getting constant harassment because they got jail time 5 years ago. So it's really just looking at how things can progress even past the actual events themselves. So how can we support victims and survivors when they come to us? How can you support victims and survivors when they come to you? Simple as that is start by believing. No matter how crazy their stories may seem, or you're like, this is really, I guess it's really a thing. It's their, we always say their perception is their reality. That's what it is. So they just need someone to start believing in them. So believe them no matter what. I always say just listen. Listen, listen, listen. Like, you can't listen enough. There's a lot of times where we're in client meetings and all we're doing is sitting and listening. We're not saying a word. So that's really giving them that outlet to talk and express. Even too, like, silence is okay. Like, I've sat in probably a good half hour, 45 minutes of silence, and then my clients just start slowly leaking stuff out, and then it starts conversations. So silence is okay also. Ask the person what they need. Sometimes they don't know what they need. So we have this kind of common concept of coming up with at least 3 ideas and present them with the power to make that choice. So what we're doing by giving them the power to make that choice is when they're sexually assaulted or they've experienced some sort of sexual violence, you're giving the power back to them to make a choice. They had all that power taken away from them when that happened. So again, you're giving the power back to them, but you're also helping them make that decision because sometimes they can't weigh, maybe a pros and cons kind of thing. They can't weigh those things, right? Or they don't know how to weigh them. So we're giving them options and working through those options with them and what that may look like. Encouraging them to talk to another adult or a friend. If we're talking about, even if they're talking with us and maybe they're struggling when they're not meeting with us outside of our meetings or outside of your meetings, who's that one friend that you can trust and you trust with everything inside of you? Can you talk to them about it when you're not able to meet with us? Kind of building that support system for them and helping them identify their support system. Some people can't identify people in their lives that are supports, so that's where we kind of put that one into play. Assisting them and calling to support within reach. We do have a lot of people that call in and it's a friend, but the person, the victim or survivor, is on the phone with their friend or sitting right next to them, but their friend initiates the phone call. It's a fairly popular and common one we see. So when we're talking about how do you support them, it's really, if you just have to help them make a phone call or help drive them to our offices or whatever that may be. And just being there for them when they need be. As a professional, you obviously have appointment times, you have all these things going on. Kind of setting those boundaries to say, hey, you know what, if I can't get to you today, I will get to you tomorrow. If they email you, just let them say, hey, I received your response, I'll get this as soon as I can. Just so so they know that they've been heard, that you noticed what they have said. It gives them validation and it lets them know that, hey, you know what, I'll get a response. I just need to be patient. It'll be okay. So that's kind of where that one comes into play. So I always like to loop back when I'm talking about my story because I started off with, the kind of introduction page about who I am and all of my accomplishments. So I like to revert back to that because I am a firm believer in overcoming your experiences, and if you overcome it and find a light at the end of the tunnel, success is awaiting on the other side. I wouldn't be who I am today without my experiences. So if you look at, going to college, married, children, working here at Support Within Reach, I have all these accomplishments, but I have all that trauma too. Like, you can use it to do good. And it takes a lot, not gonna lie. But you can always use it to do good. Um, I still find myself having bad days, but one thing I always try is to find one good thing in my day and focus on that. Because we are only human, we make mistakes, we're allowed to have bad days, we weren't made to be perfect. So it's really just finding that one good thing in a day and focusing on that. Even when I'm meeting with clients, I'm like, what is one good thing that happened to you today? Oh, well, this happened. Okay, cool. Well, tell me about it. And then all suddenly, like their crisis level has gone down, and they're like, whoa, like they didn't expect that to happen. Um, so I really try to focus on that, and even for myself and even for my co-advocates, what's one good thing that happened today? And then they start telling me about it, um, and it just helps reduce the stress level. So just a little tidbit for you. So what can we do, right? I swear this is like the last thing you will hear from me. Okay, just kidding. Um, so don't be a bystander. When we're talking about a bystander, you're witnessing something, you're not saying anything about it, you're not doing anything about it. Don't be that bystander. If you see something, say something. If it's not a safe situation for you as a professional, as a community member, as a teacher, as a friend, as a parent, call 911. You have people out there that will help you with these situations, especially if it's not safe. Ask the person if they need help. Sometimes they don't want help. Sometimes they don't know how to ask for help. Um, Maybe they're just, you witnessed maybe some sexual harassment. Maybe they just want it to be done and over with, and that's what it is. That's what it is. Just don't call law enforcement assuming that that's what they wanted out of the situation. Call a sexual assault or harassment for what it is. A lot of times if you know you hear some sexual harassment going on and you say, hey dude, that's sexual harassment, they look at you with this funny look on their face, and then they kind of walk away, or they don't, they're just like, okay dude, whatever, like, by calling it out for what it is helps reduce the stigma, but it also can help stop whatever is happening. Create a superior support group, in your school, in your organization, in your professional community, because you never know. I mean, you might find out a lot about your coworkers if peer support groups are created. If you're working in schools, having that peer support group, will help put it maybe into perspective for some youth that, hey, this happened to someone else too, and it's okay. I'm not the only one. Attend local events about sexual violence to learn more. When we're talking about like health fairs, we're talking about sometimes there's days where we just go sit in a school with a booth, or we have walks or 5Ks or fundraisers, that kind of thing. You can learn how to help create change. we don't need any more #MeToo stories. That doesn't mean stop talking about it. This means if we put a stop to these behaviors that create sexual violence, there'll be no more new stories. You know, like, but obviously if it happened to you, you have your right to share it. And that's not what I'm saying here. It's just saying if we stop things when they happen as a bystander, we can stop these new stories. We can start changing the world we're living in. And the world's in a difficult place today. And it's something we need more than ever are those people that are willing to stand up and say, hey, this is wrong. Let's change this. So I want to thank you for your time. And I hope this presentation was useful to whoever views it. Thank you.